As the title says, this video is about removing the Magna and VFR rear heads. It's not going to be a very detailed video because it's not all that different from what it took to remove the front heads. If you'd like more detail, there should be links below to the videos I created from when I removed the front heads. I'll start with the rear head on the Magna engine. I've already removed the valve covers and the cams, but there is a difference in the valve covers that might be worth noting. The front valve cover is a one-piece design, whereas the rear valve cover was a two-piece design, although it can be removed as one piece. There is a gasket between the two pieces in the cover, and the service manual here shows it. The original Honda gasket is a thin metal stamping, and it uses sealant on the edges. My kit came with a flexible replacement, but it wasn't the same size or even the same shape, so I ended up putting the metal one back on. Another thing that's different with the rear head is that before you remove the cams, you need to set the crank at the T1 position instead of the T2 position like we did on the front head. Once you're on the T1 position, make sure it's the compression stroke. That's when the valves are closed and there's no cam pushing on a lifter. If you've got a cam pushing on a lifter, then go back to the crank and turn it one revolution so that you're back at the T1 position. At this point, there shouldn't be any cam pushing on a lifter. Next, you remove the cam chain tensioner, which is bolted to this head instead of the block. Just like the front head, I noticed the markings on the cam retainers, so I added them in dark text to this picture so I could print it up to make sure I put them back in the same place. Now you can remove the cam retainer bolts, the cam retainers, and the chain guard. I didn't want to fight it this time, so I just brought my air tools out. This time, instead of digging the bolts and washers out with a screwdriver, I decided to use my socket adapter with the stack of magnets attached to it to pull everything out. Moving to the VFR motor, I'll start by removing the valve cover. This cover is also a two-piece design, but it can be removed as one piece, which is how I'll take it off, since there's no need to break it down any further. Before removing the cam retainers and the cam, we need to get the crank in the right position. For the rear head, it's the T1 position during the compression stroke. During the compression stroke, all the valves are closed, which means there's no pressure on the cams. If any of the valves are open, you'll need to go back and rotate the crank 360 degrees. With the crank in the right position, we can move on to removing the cam retainers and the cams. The arrows on both cam gears should now be aligned with the edges of the head. Next, I remove the 16 bolts holding the cam retainers, then remove those retainers and the cams. Now I can remove the head bolts. Broke the big ones loose with the impact wrench and then used my magnet to pull the bolts and the washers out. Now I'm removing the exhaust manifolds. Again, this is the VFR block, and I've cleaned it up quite a bit. It's not painted. The Magna block is painted. And instead, I took polish, Mother's aluminum polish, to this, and I'm going to leave it that way. Oh boy, look at that. There is some serious buildup on that valve. Son of a what in the When it was running, I had a little bit of oil blowing out of this exhaust, and I thought it was just a bad valve seal. So this is what I was cussing about. The piston was actually burnt. Not only was it burnt, it had a hole in it. I ended up replacing the piston. I had to order a VFR piston because the Magna and the VFR have a different part number for their pistons. I also got a new set of rings and honed the cylinder. The good news is I was able to remove the old piston and install the new one without having to split the cases.